Okay, so good afternoon. I would say ladies and gentlemen, but apparently it's only gentlemen right now. Colleagues, internship mentor, welcome to my final internship presentation. This first slide you see right here is not only a pretty cover, every letter and every digit on this slide is still a little bit bizarre to me. There's my name surrounded by the terms international internship and 2021. And it should be of no surprise to you that this combination is rather special. Even though the pandemic changed all of our lives, it didn't stop me from coming here and going on this adventure. So today I'm looking forward to sharing this story with all of you. So what am I going to be talking about? First, I'm going to tell you all about my internship company, smapiot. Of course, the colleagues will already know what smapiot is all about. Then I will highlight the context and the timeline of my internship very briefly. After that, the main meat of the presentation, what I actually want to talk about is what I actually did in these 3 months of being here, of course. After that will be followed by a retrospective on how I will look back at these 3 months and share my experiences. And lastly, I'll conclude with some closing words, of course. Now let's talk about smapiot. Smapiot is a young IT company located in the beautiful city of Munich in Germany. This is of course also the location that I have been staying for the last 3 months. smapiot's team consists of these 9 members, and I count myself for the time being as one of these 9 members. These people, most of which, or some of which, are actually present also in this meeting, provide consultancy services as well as contribution to internal projects as well. And they are considered experts in the fields that smapiot focuses on. Now, what are these fields? These mainly are supporting companies and embracing the digital transformation, helping companies derive the right solution architecture for their system, landscape, and business model. Also implementing modular applications, mostly based on a microfrontend architecture, and I will tell more about that later. And then also managing identity solutions that are secure and scalable, of course. Let's focus on this modular web application part first, because in this space, smapiot also develops its own product called Piral. Now, Piral is an open source framework for modular web applications that are decoupled and scalable. And it achieves this by using the microfrontend architecture. Again, more about that later. Piral aims to have a great user and developer experience with a focus on performance and also developer tooling. It's built upon React, but it has support for many different frameworks, and it's highly customizable. So you only use the things that you need, and it achieves this by plugins. Now, what are microfrontends? Microfrontends, they try to extend the idea and the benefits really of the microservices architecture into the front-end space. And in essence, that comes down to splitting up the front-end monolith, as you would call it, into smaller and more manageable, easily manageable pieces. So as you can see on the example, what the microservice architecture did for the backend is microfrontends for the front-end. And this also allows them to have independent teams working on each of the slices of the front-end and backend together. Now, in the Piral framework, web application consists of the Piral instance, which is the app shell, the layer you would see over here. And then the individual pilots or the individual feature modules are also called microfrontends. So these are the 2 parts. Then the pilots get integrated into the app shell, but these pilots mostly come from a feed service. You could also just import them via a JSON file or something, but mostly this is done via an API, via a feed service. And the developers then simply push this microfrontends onto the feed service, and they get integrated into the app shell or the Piral instance. smapiot provides users access to its own proprietary feed service, which has a free community edition for developers and for proof of concepts, and also a premium enterprise edition for, of course, businesses. This feed is cloud-based, but can also be installed on-premise, so there's a lot of flexibility there. Right, that was the first part. Let's move on to the context of my internship. And that mostly, looking back at it, consisted of two big goals. One is contribution to this framework, to Piral, making improvements in both functionality and also developer experience. And then also creating Piral projects, sample projects, proof of concepts, to show the capabilities of this framework, and later then also show these to the community and write articles and blog posts and other media to engage with this community, because we all know in the front-end space this is also very important. This is a concise timeline of my 12-week internship. I won't go into depth right now, and I will break this down in the next chapter step by step. But you can already see that most of the stuff I touched is also directly followed with practical project and then an article. So this was the flow, really. Okay, viele kleine Leute, die in vielen kleinen Orten viele Dinge tun, können das Gesicht der Welt verändern. I hope I didn't butcher that. And also, I don't know if I changed the face of the entire world, but at least I hoped I had an impact on smapiot and on Piral in this case. Now, let's take a look at what I actually did in this internship. First, excuse me, this is a hard word to say. I familiarized myself with Piral and React. These were two technologies that I previously actually never touched. So, in my opinion, the best way to do that was to just experiment, and I think Florian agreed with that. So, that was very well done. I did some practical stuff with it, and then afterwards I packaged this all up in a nice project once I got the concepts right, and then I could make a sample application, this project, the sample application, and write an article to share it with the community. So this first application that I went with was a Netflix clone, entirely built with React and the Piral framework. I would like to show you a quick demo of what this demo application actually is. If I can, of course, find it. Yes. So it should be visible, I'm not sure.
It is.
It is? All right, great. Okay, so this is the sample application. Let me close this for a second. So this is the Netflix clone I'm talking about. It's just, a standard Netflix lookalike with a browse page and a favorites page. And you can see all of these favorites here are stored in local storage, so there's no database or backend. You can switch users, and then the favorites will be empty for another one if you go back. This user has its own favorites. So you can add to favorites like this. You can see what's added and what's not added. And then there's also a search for hello, I don't know. For searching other series and TV shows. Right, pretty simple. How is this now behind the scenes actually done? For that, I'm going to use the Piral inspector. And you can already see that this application actually consists of 5 microfrontends. One is the browse, the favorites, the profile, the search, and the watch. Now, what happens if I turn off this watch? Then suddenly all the thumbnails go away. Right, so these thumbnails actually come from the watch pilot, but it's what's amazing about this is that this is actually the browse pilot. So that means pilots can not only expose pages like this browse page, but they can also expose what they would call fragments or extensions. So this watch pilot brings in these extensions into the browse pilot, and these are done all. If I turn everything off right here, you can see what the app shell actually looks like. So it's just a header and a footer, and there's nothing more. So all these pilots are separately loaded in. So the search bar you can see appearing here, the profile is appearing, the favorites, and then the browse page. So these are all composed into the app shell. And that's my Netflix clone. Right. I don't know if there's already some questions about this, or maybe we'll save those up for the end. Let's continue for now. So, After this, I wrote an article about my experiences creating this Netflix clone and using Piral, of course. I published this article on the dev community, and you can find the link on dev.to or to, I'm not sure, /Dante. If I click on this, you can see it's a pretty lengthy article going really in depth. You can see the overview of the pilots. Yeah, so it's a pretty long read, but it had some good responses from the community. More about that later also. Oops. Yes. Right, let's move on to then the main area of contribution actually. So this was more of a getting to know Piral, getting to know React, and then also publishing an article. But how did I actually contribute to the framework? Well, the main area of contribution is in Piral Blazor. So, as I mentioned before, the Piral framework is highly customizable, and it does that via plugins. And one type of plugin is a converter plugin, so a way for Piral to use different UI frameworks, other than React, of course. And you can see, for example, plugins for Vue and Svelte and maybe Angular, alongside many others. But what I wanted to focus on, and what we wanted to focus on in the internship, is actually a plugin for Blazor. Now, what is Blazor? This is a technology to run C# in the browser, briefly said. But in this, we will only focus on the client-side Blazor, which is also called Blazor WebAssembly. And the WebAssembly part makes it so that C# can actually run in the browser. The next slide, I'm contemplating if I should tell you all of this, because this is really complicated, and I'll maybe go over it very briefly, how Blazor actually achieves this. Without going into much detail, you compile your C# and Razor files into .NET assemblies, Blazor assemblies, DLLs. And then, rather than transpiling these all into WebAssembly, you actually run them on a .NET runtime that's written in WebAssembly. So these get run and on a runtime in the browser. And because this .NET runtime runs in the JavaScript runtime, you can interop with JavaScript and also use the APIs of the browser, like the document object model or DOM. And this is how Blazor renders, in fact, its components. Now, if this was a little bit very fast and very complex, then just maybe it's .NET running in the browser. That's maybe all you need to know. Now let's look at how Piral actually integrates these microfrontends to be able to render them in the Piral instance, because that will become relevant in this story. Also, very simplified, the Piral instance will call on each pilot a setup function. These pilots, it retrieves it from the feed service, but it will call a setup function to see what each pilot will define to go for integration into the Piral instance. For example, I take this. This is a setup function in a pilot, and this pilot says, I would like to register a page with a route foo, and I would like there to be a foo component. And then I would also like to register a menu item, and therefore I also have a component for that. So this is all very obvious in JavaScript land. This is very simple, but how would Blazor actually do this? We'll talk about that later, so this is relevant now. So this is how Piral does it. Let's talk about the combination. How would they work together? Well, when I first started my internship, this was the situation. Again, I will try to not make it too long. How the workflow actually would work is that you would set up a Blazor pilot with the template here, so Piral Blazor template. This would create a pilot which would have a Blazor part and then also a TypeScript part. And this is the part I talked about earlier, about the setup function and defining everything that needs to go into the app shell. So this is not nice that you have to context switch between actually writing Blazor code and then also saying, oh, I need to register all of these things in TypeScript too. So that was an issue. Well, instead of naming these issues like this, let's list them actually. What were some of the issues or some of the drawbacks of this diagram? There were some issues with this approach. Mainly, there is no support for different Blazor versions, since Piral and Piral Blazor need the same version to be compatible with each other. Piral Blazor would actually, behind the scenes, always load a certain version of Piral Blazor core, which are the .NET files. But since these had to be the same version here, these two, you could not actually bring the version of Blazor that you actually wanted. So that was a problem there. You could also not transform an existing Blazor project into a pilot, or not easily, because all the setup for the pilot was done with the template, as I showed you before. And then, like I said, registering components onto the pilot API, so writing that integration in TypeScript was kind of a bad experience. It required you to context switch a lot. So where you would have this integration previously, that would now turn into this. You would have to define every single Blazor reference, every DLL you would need. And those could be rather complex because you could have NuGet packages and other dependencies, or maybe clause libraries. This was tedious, and it was also error prone because these dependencies needed to be specified in the right order, or you could then risk loading a dependency before before a child dependency was loaded and resulting in errors. And also, I wouldn't have to tell you that this was rather repetitive if you wanted in Blazor to register 100 pages. Doubtable if you would do that, but you could. Then you will have to go in TypeScript and register all of those 100 pages also. So that would be quite tedious. So in the 3 months of my internship, maybe the 1 month that we actually worked on this, this got improved significantly. Of course, not only by me, but I had a part in it, so I would like to tell it. And this is the new overview of how this actually works. It seems more complicated, but I'll just address what issues got solved. So now there is support for different Blazor versions. Piral and Piral Blazor can keep the same version now, and you just need to bring a peer dependency, which is a new package called just Blazor. And then you would load Piral, for example, version 0.13.0, Piral Blazor also, and then you would choose Blazor version 5 or 3.2. And this would then load the right version behind the scenes. So that was the first issue solved. Second of all, you can now also transform an existing pilot Blazor project into a pilot. This is because of the addition of the Piral Blazor tools package that we wrote up. Let's compare the previous approaches to just keep a little bit of the overview. So where the template would do the heavy lifting before, now this template is actually optional. That's why it's a little bit dimmer here. Because your Blazor code would now use Piral Blazor tools, and that would set up the API integration for you. So you wouldn't have to do that from the template, and then that's it. And that ties into the next benefit, registering components on the pilot API. If you don't do crazy stuff, it now happens mostly automatically. This is because the Piral Blazor tool package uses now an analyzer that can analyze your pilot and look at all the components you have defined and write the TypeScript for you. So that's really nice. I was going to explain this in detail, but I'm going to skip over it because I think this is already a little bit too technical. Only thing you should know from a developer's point of view, most of the time you just need Blazor attributes, and the tooling will do the rest for you. In some cases you will have to define some setup, but in most cases you just define attributes and you're done. No need to go into TypeScript to configure everything. Right, I guess that was a big chunk of information. So let's take a look at how this was practically now done in a project also, and then an article about it. So from Netflix we go to Spotify. I created a Spotify, a way to switch up your Spotify experience, I called it. And it's a cheesy play on words between Piral and Spotify, so it's Spiralfy. I'm going to give a very quick demo of it. So, landing page of Spiralfy, you log in via Spotify. I'm already logged in, so normally it goes to Spotify and you have to log in with your Spotify account, but he remembers me here. And it says use the button above to randomize between your playlists. So my Spotify account is connected. I click this button and Spiralfy now chooses a playlist. I'm going to mute this tab. Spiralfy now chooses a playlist and it randomizes all the songs in that playlist. So this is the playlist Dance Floor Classics. This is a playlist I apparently have. And if I want to see what other playlist I have that I haven't heard before, then we just click here a few times, and now it's Popular House, for example. So I wanted something that could give me some inspiration, what playlists to look at next. So, and these controls are all built in Blazor, and the web playback part is another pilot in TypeScript. So this uses then all of these technologies together, which is cool that microfrontends, that's a benefit that microfrontends also have, is that you can bring in different technologies into one application. Finally, I also created an article about this, and if you thought this explanation I just gave was technical and you liked it, you should also go read the article because I go into much more detail there about how this was all done, and some of the other challenges too, like debugging via Visual Studio was also something that we solved. So that's there too. Right, and this final part of my internship is now mostly bug fixing, writing documentation for Piral Blazor, answering some community questions and comments on the articles, and then also making some new proof of concept solutions for further work. Okay, the main part is over. I want to briefly tell you the entire story of my internship again, but very condensed, starting from the very beginning. Let's go here. So after a long search in Corona times to get an international internship, which I really wanted, I was very, very relieved to finally get this email in my inbox that I was allowed to come to Munich and work with smapiot for my internship. So I started to make plans, and I hoped after 2 COVID tests and heaps of paperwork, I boarded 2 planes that would bring me from Brussels to Amsterdam and then to Munich. I stayed here in quarantine for a week, and then I could go to work. I worked from my apartment, where as you can see, my table is actually too small to fit my entire setup. And yes, I brought those 2 screens from home. I am crazy like that. But I also went to the office 2 times per week to meet the team and then collaborate together. This was, of course, not ideal, but it was nice, and both places had coffee, so everything was just great. As for the work itself, my retrospective on the work itself, I realized that I have traversed the Dunning-Kruger curve. I don't know if you know this. This is the Dunning-Kruger curve. I thought I was pretty confident in my technical skills. I was on what you would call the peak of Mount Stupid. To be fair, maybe I was a little bit over it already, but nonetheless. Working then with the new technologies and the inner workings of Piral and the software framework catapulted me right into the valley of despair. I think, for example, Florian can definitely confirm that I began to doubt myself, and I thought, yeah, I would never understand these concepts. But then slowly but surely, I passed through the slope of enlightenment, and I started to really enjoy the work, actually. My articles were pretty well received as well by the community and my colleagues as well, which was very nice. The first one even reached short of 10,000 reach, which I was amazed about, and it reached some good stats on the React subreddit too. So I was really proud of that, and it made me a lot more confident in the process. Also, I was contributing a lot. My code was working, which is always nice, and there was some positive results. So langsam begann es Sinn zu machen, as you can see here. I started going up the slope again, which was very nice. In my limited amount of free time, thank you bachelor thesis and also bad weather sometimes, I discovered Munich, which is a really, really beautiful city. It's a pity that meeting a lot of people was not possible, and going out to bars and all did not work. But I saw a lot of beautiful stuff, I must say. And because I could not go out to eat, I did a lot of home cooking, by the way. So that was also nice. Speaking of food, alles hat ein Ende, nur die Wurst hat zwei. One of my favorite German sayings I encountered. So yeah, this is almost the end of my adventure. And because of that, I would like now take the opportunity to thank a few people as well. First of all, big thank you, of course, to Mr. Mertens and also Mrs. Van Achter of my school, Hogent, to provide me with the necessary documents, but also the guidance, of course, for this internship. Of course, I want to thank also every team member, everyone here and everyone not here, for making me feel welcome in the team. It's too bad this pandemic prevented us from going for a beer or something after work, but we'll see, maybe this last week can still give surprises. In particular, I want to thank Lothar and Birgit, of course, for providing me with this opportunity, for helping me get here also. From telling me where to get COVID tests and which documents to sign, to where to order groceries and what are the nicest spots in Munich. Their help was very, very valuable, and I appreciate that greatly. And last but not least, my internship mentor, Florian. I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone here that I have immense respect for you and also the work you do. While your great expertise felt sometimes like things were going 3 gears too high for me, I now realize you just probably believed in me and the fact that I could get there if I really pushed through. And I think it's safe to say that you made me then a better software developer in the process. So thank you for being my mentor, and thank you for everything, actually. Right, and apart from thanking mom, dad, sister, dog, it's been all. It's been an amazing adventure. Auf Wiedersehen. And that's it.